Okay, so for this tutorial, I'm going to be creating a mirror. So the mirror is going to look like this. Okay, it looks great, you know. So for this mirror, you're going to have to start with the head, and you can just make a cube or with whatever player model you're making. Just make sure it's as straight as possible and center the pivot point. And if the pivot point isn't centered on your cube, like you see how mine isn't directly at the center over here, you can edit the cube, select, and then click the options button and center pivot on selection. And then you make the pivot right at the center. This is the only pivot that's going to be centered that is perfectly in the middle. For the body, you're going to have to center the pivot point as well if you want to use a cube. I wouldn't suggest doing this on models that are like big and bulky because then the pivot point kind of gets a little confused. But I would take a cube and then like merge the objects and then center the pivot point on that so then it's straight. But for the body, I would suggest the pivot point would be directly in the body like this, and then you move it up a little bit. You know, like that. Because if you don't, it will end up being something like, hold on. Because if you don't lower down the pivot will look like this. It'll be like inside your head, and you don't want that to happen. So we're just gonna do this. Okay. And the pivots for the hand, you can also center them, but they will have to be inverted. My pivot here isn't straight, but it's okay. This is just to show the process for me, so it's not going to be perfect. For this one, it kind of is a little better, but I would suggest making them flat and then centering the pivot and then, you know, or whatnot, and then put the pivot like in the middle. So just make sure that the pivot is like this. You can always pause the video whenever you want to see the pivots, just to make sure. Just to make sure you can just center or pause the video over here, and then I just, you know, you can do one hand and then you can just copy the hand like this, and it'll work just as fine, to be honest. So, for the tutorial, we're going to get started with the circuits, and here is everything you're going to need for a particular body part. So, the body part is going to look like this. You're going to have, you can just pause the video here and take a picture of the video, or take a picture of the chips, and this is the chips you're going to need. Chips you're going to need a toggle button, a RecRoom object at first tag, and then you're going to need the player head position, head orientation, and then the vector 3 split with 3 multiplied chips, and then a vector 3 create and coordinate split, like all of this in the set transform. But as we go, you can just take a picture at the end and then do it like that if you want, but I wouldn't guarantee that it would look the same or work the same. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to go to the toggle button and see if the toggle is pressed, and constantly check that with the event receiver update 30 hertz. And then if it is on, then get if the player who clicked like this is valid and local, and then just set that transform like that. See, look, now you can click the button. It'll give you errors because nothing is connected, but it is working. So from here, I would take the player head position of the player who clicked and the player head orientation and connect those two to the input. And then for the vector 3 split and the coordinate 3 split, or the coordinate split, not 3 split, I'm sorry, you just connect them both like this. Okay? So for the vector 3 split and the vector 3 create, you're going to connect the x to the x and the y to the y. And here's where it gets a little different. You're going to connect the z to the top value of the multiplication input. And then you're going to connect the output of the multiply to the z. And then you're going to connect this, and you're going to make this -1. And you're going to do the same thing you did here, with this, but this time you're going to use the Z and the W, and you're going to invert those. So you connect the X to the X of the quaternion split to the quaternion create, the Y to the Y, and then you're going to do the Z at the top here with the Z on the quaternion create. You're going to do the W at the top with the multiplication, and then the same thing with the W. And then now what you're going to do is, because it's very annoying to do like to type -1 over and over. So what I would suggest doing is, this is called a reroute chip. You can practically connect any output into this, and then it changes to that output. So I could change this to a player, and it could connect to a player or a vector3. This can connect to basically any input, and it's very useful. So just connect this, and then change this to -1, because this will stay a constant value no matter what you do. Now what you want to do is make this here the second value to the multiplication chips, connect them to the reroute. So they're all being multiplied. So the Z is being multiplied by -1 to invert its value, and it's going to connect to the Z, and then the same thing for this. And so for the head, you're going to be able to connect the vector3 create to the position, and then the rotation you're going to connect to the coordinate create. Now your target is obviously going to be the head, because you're going to want to give every body part here a tag, of course. So this is what you need for the head, and this is how it works. And you can just see, look, now it works. Now the head only works. So if you want to keep doing this with every single body or every single part of the body, you don't even have to do this for anything. So if you just want to make a mirror, and you want to make one kind of cube or one thing, this is the way you're supposed to do it. Anyways, so now to move on to the whole body, right? So I did two separate ones, so I don't have to replace the whole thing over and over. This is something different. I will show you that in a second. So you're going to continue the entire thing like you did over there, over here. So you're going to connect again the X to the X, the Y to the Y, and then the Z value to the top of the multiplication with the Z here. And then you're going to connect it to -1. And then if you check the, what should we call it? Actually, not check. I'm sorry. I'm messing up here. Just check it to the player who clicked the button. And you're going to do the exact same thing for the body. So the body, you're going to connect it to the player who clicked the button. And then you're going to connect the vector split and the coordinate split right here. I'm just move this down so it's not too confusing. Okay. So you're going to do the same thing again. So you're going to connect the vector split to the X and the Y to the Y. And then you're going to connect the Z and then connect this to -1. And then do the same thing with the coordinate split. Sorry, the X with the X here. And the Y with the Y. And then you're going to invert the numbers for the Z and the W by -1 again. See, now this is much easier than rather having to type it over and over. So now I can connect the vector3 to the vector3 position and the rotation to the coordinate create, because coordinates are rotation, obviously. And this is the torso tag. So I just named them by 2 letters. So this is TO is torso and RH is right hand. Okay, now if I connect these two and I start to like turn it on, you'll see that the head starts to work. and the body starts to work with it. So like if I push my hand forward and my hand backwards, it imitates what my body does. You see? And you want to do this same thing with the hands. So the hands, you'll do the vector split again, x to x, y to y, and then the z onto the multiplication chip, and then connect it to -1. And then you're going to do the same thing with the coordinate split. So you're going to do x to x, y to y, and then, you know, invert the z and w, and then invert it by multiplying it by -1. Okay? And then you're going to do this same process over and over until you get to the entire body. And over here, I'm obviously, like you see over here, I set the tag for the thing to RH for right hand, and then for the left hand is obviously going to be LH. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. It just LH. Let's just fix that. LH. Okay. And then set the can modify with circuits on. So now you can modify it with circuits. Okay. So you see that you can connect the left hand to the same thing as you did with the right hand. Sorry, I'm really terrible at explaining now. I'm talking about this over and over. And then you'll connect it just like you did with the body to the right hand. Here we go. And now you just connect it like that. There you go. Turn it on. See, now the right hand works. Works perfectly fine. Okay. And we have one more to do. So you'll connect the left hand to the vector, and then the left hand rotation to the coordinate split. And then you'll connect this to the player who pushes the button. Okay? And again, so it's going to be x to x, and then y to y. Oops, I accidentally did that. Let me remove that. You should not want that there. Okay. And then the y to the y. Okay. Then you want the z on the multiplication chip inverted by -1. Because any number multiplied by a negative is a negative unless the number at the top is a negative. So a negative times a negative is a positive, and a positive times a negative is always a negative, is what I mean. That's just math. So now I can do the same thing with the coordinate and then adjust the y value with the x, so x with x and then y with y, and then the z with this up here, right? And then the output goes to the z on the right. And then you can do the same thing with the w, and then multiply both by -1. And then you can connect the coordinate. Coordinate means rotation again. And then connect the vector 3 to the position. And then the target will be your left hand. Where is the left hand? Oh, left over here. Okay. And then you connect it. And then, bam, you practically should be done with your mirror. Here. Now it works. See? So this up here, as you saw earlier, this is it sets the authority for the RecRoom object. So what it does is it takes all of these RecRoom objects here, right? And it places them all in a list. You see that? How they're all in a list? It places them all in a list, and then it takes that list into the for each, which means the for each will loop for every single object. So it'll loop for this one, this one, this one, and this one until it finishes. So when it loops for every individual item inside the list, the authority will be set to Dio. That's what it is. So when you click the button, it makes it less laggier when it follows somebody. So you click the button and then that, yeah, it just makes it easier. I just kind of have this because why not? But I will also have this in my inventions so people can just use it and it'll be public. So yeah, just check it out. My at name is right here. I I don't know why RecRoom's being weird. Okay, my at name is right here, so it's Do on Rec. So you can just check it out if you want. Everything will be here. This is my profile pictures. Just know that this is what I look like and whatnot. So yeah, this is the tutorial done. Hope this helps.